We learn Chelek Tezayin, the first Sicha to Pashas Pekudei, and we're using the Lashon HaKodesh translation that is available on the website of Project Pekudei Sichas. Kvan Isbar Pomim Rabbis, Sherashi bePerush al HaTorah Emer al Kol Inyan Shechosr beBir bePshuta Shel Mikra uMefarshei. As was explained numerous times, Rashi will address any and all inyanim that are difficult in the simple understanding of the psukim, and Rashi will be farish it. He'll explain it. And if Rashi doesn't have an explanation in the simple understanding of the psukim, then Rashi will write, I don't know. Because Rashi, as Rashi explains already in Sefer Bereishis and Pashas Bereishis, that he set out to explain any difficulty in the simple understanding of the psukim. And therefore, if we see something which at first glance seems to be difficult in the understanding of the psukim, and Rashi isn't addressing it, so we must conclude one of the two options. Either that when we analyze the psukim in the simple understanding of the psukim, the question is not really a question to begin with, or the second option, that Rashi already had addressed the difficulty in a previous Rashi earlier on somewhere in Chumash, and that will explain it, so Rashi does not have to explain it again. In our parshiyos, this is Vayakov, Pekudei, there is something difficult, and we don't see that Rashi should address this difficulty. And this is the following. Parshas Vayakov, metu'eres ba'kosuf mesiras tzivur Hashem al trumas hamishkan al de Moshe Rabbeinu lebnei Yisrael. In Parshas Vayakil, the Torah tells us, records how Moshe Rabbeinu gave over Hashem's command about building the Mishkan to the Bnei Yisrael. And when the Torah records how Moshe Rabbeinu gave this over to the Bnei Yisrael, the Torah records all the details. Take the Truma, the command to bring gold and silver and all the other materials for the Melechas HaMishkan, for building the Mishkan. And then the Torah records how Moshe Rabbeinu told the Bnei Yisrael the mitzvahs, the commandments, how each part and each keli of the Mishkan should be made. And there also, the Torah in Parshas Vayakil records all the details. The Moshe Rabbeinu told the Yidden how to build the Mishkan, the Kroshim, the Menorah, the Shulchan, each thing with all the details. And then, the Torah then continues, the Torah records how the Yidden brought all the materials for the Melech HaMishkan for building the Mishkan. And then the Torah continues, and again, with all the details. How the Chachmei Alev, the wise Yidden with heart, Chachmei Alev, the different Aliyah, Betzalel, Aliyah, and the other Chachmei Alev, how they actually went ahead and used these materials and made the Mishkan. As Hayeriyos v'chulu, as Kalklei HaMishkan, the curtains, the coverings for the Mishkan, and all the kelim, v'chein b'pasha seinu, as Bigdei Kahuna, in our Pasha Pekudei, the Torah then continues how they made the Bigdei Kahuna with these materials. Because bekitzur shemesher masr of Bnei Yisrael is called tzivuye Hashem al nidvas asiyas hamishkan. It would have been sufficient if the Torah would just write the Moshe gave over to the Bnei Yisrael all the commandments that Hashem commanded about the donation for the Mishkan and the making of the Mishkan. The details of which are already listed in Parshas Truma, Parshas Tetzaveh, and some in Parshas Kisisa. So the Torah does not have to again tell us that Moshe told the Yidden all these things and go on to say all the things again. Rather, the Torah could have just said that Moshe gave over to Bnei Yisrael all the commandments that Hashem gave about the donations and about the making of the Mishkan and its Kalim in a all-encompassing short wording and without going into the details once again. And then the Torah could have recorded again by Yasub Bnei Yisrael Kechol Asher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe, that the Yidden then did everything according Moshe's tzivui, as Moshe gave over the tzivui of Hashem. But no, the Torah tells us again how Moshe told the Yidden and goes through each thing, how Moshe is telling it to the Bnei Yisrael, and then how the Yidden did it, each thing how they did it. When both of these stories, the Torah could have just written very shortly, one pasuk telling us that Moshe gave over to the Yidden all the commandments about the donation and about the making of the Mishkan, and then another pasuk tells us that the Yidden went and did everything according to these commandments, and that's it. Or even shorter, if the Torah would have just said, the Yidden did everything in to how Hashem commanded it to Moshe. Take it right after Parshas Truma Tetzaveh Kisisa, when the Torah tells us about Hashem giving these commandments to Moshe initially, if it would have said right there, and the Yidden then did everything in accordance with these commandments, we would have understood that Moshe obviously gave over these commandments to the Yidden, and we would have known from this pasuk that the Yidden actually did it. As we find in many places in Torah, and even in these very parashiyos, we find this style in Chumash. The Torah does not always record both how Hashem tells Moshe the tzivui, and then how Moshe tells the tzivui to the Yidden, and then how the Yidden did it. So what need is there to go into all the details again and again? The first repetition, when the Torah records how Moshe gave over the commandments to the Yidden, and then another repetition in the Psukim who actually describe how the Yidden fulfilled the commandments. Especially in the beginning of Parshas Vayakhel, where the Torah starts with this repetition, says Rashi, Rashi tells us, I already explained all the details of the Mishkan, the Nedava, and the Mishkan, and how to do all these things in Mokim Tzavosam, in the place where they were first commanded, which is the Parshiyas of Truma and Tetzaveh, Kisisa. In other words, Rashi is telling us right at the beginning of Parshas Vayakhel, I'm not going to explain to you again all the details of the Mishkan and the Kalim and the Big Akuna and all that, because I already explained it to you. In other words, there's nothing new here. All of this was already discussed. And therefore Rashi tells us, I have nothing to add on to that which I already explained to you in Parshas Truma Tetzaveh Kisisa. So that makes the question and the wonderment even greater. So for what reason Does the pasuk then need to repeat it a second time and a third time? All the details. Now, all this is really a very obvious question, which anybody who learns the simple psukim, the simple meaning of the psukim, will be confronted with this phenomena and this question. Numerous mefarshim actually deal with this question. And Rashi, silent. He does not address it in any way. He doesn't answer it, not in the beginning of this whole repetition, in beginning of Parshas Vayakil, and not at the very end in Parshas Pekudei. ובפרט שלפני זה בפרשת תיסו עומד רש"י לפרש הטעם שחוזר הכוס ועל כמה תיבות ספורות. Now, to appreciate this question even more, the Rebbe contrasts it with a different situation where the Torah repeats just a few words, and Rashi is addressing how come the Torah is repeating it. And this is in the Pasha beforehand, Pasha's Kisisa. When the Torah gives us the pasuk, tells us the pasuk of not cooking meat in milk, says Rashi, this is written 3 times in Chumash. And Rashi explains why it needs to be written 3 times in Chumash. Although is 5 words. And still, Rashi has the need to explain how come that these 5 words are repeated a second time and a third time in Chumash. While here, there is repetition of numerous parshias, Vayakil and Pekudei, and in Vayakil and in Pekudei, each one has numerous parshias, repeating in lengthy detail all the details of the Mishkan a second time and a third time. And Rashi is not saying any explanation why the Torah would do that. We might suggest at least part of the question can be understood al pi pirush Rashi b'Parshas Seinu, based on a certain Rashi in Parshas Pekudei. Al pasuk u'betzalel ben Uri v'Gomer also kol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe pirush Rashi. When Betzalel, the pasuk says that Betzalel did everything in accordance to how Hashem commanded Moshe. So Rashi says on that pasuk, Moshe tziva leBetzalel lasis tchila kelim v'achar kach mishkan. When Moshe Rabbeinu told Betzalel the details, so he first told Betzalel to do the kelim for the Mishkan, the Aron, the Shulchan, the Menorah, v'achar kach mishkan, and then he told him to build the Mishkan. Amalei Betzalel, so Betzalel told back to Moshe Rabbeinu, Minag olam lasit tchila bayis v'achar kach mesim kelim b'seichei. It is the custom of the world to first build a house and then put the furniture in. So Moshe Rabbeinu told Betzalel, you are right. That's really how Hashem told it to me. And that's indeed what Betzalel did, that he first made the Mishkan and then he built the Kelim. So we might suggest that is the reason why, when it comes to the actual building of the Mishkan, the details have to be repeated. Because only by telling us again the details will we realize that Betzalel actually reversed the order from how it is in the command in Pashas Truma. And he first did the Mishkan and then he did the Kelim. But the Rebbe says that is not a good answer. Because besides for the fact that does not yet explain why the Torah has to repeat all the details also in how Moshe repeated it to the Bnei Israel, that only explains why in describing how Bezalel actually did the Mishkan and the Kelim, it has to be recorded so that we realize that he reversed the order. But Moshe is giving over the Tzivui. Why does that need to be repeated? So that we still don't know based on this answer. But besides for that, even for the third repetition of the actual building and making the Mishkan and the Kelim, it doesn't answer it either. Because Aleph, first of all, that would only require that when the Torah tells us about that specific detail, that the Mishkan was built first and then the Kelim, so that is the only detail that we really need for that. But how each Keli was done, and how exactly the menorah was built, and how exactly the shulchan was built, and all their details, that we still don't need repeated again. And even if you want to say that once he mentions the Kelim, he's going to describe also how the Kelim were done. But why does he need to repeat how the Bigdei Kehuna were done? That's not part of the Mishkan and the Kelim discussion. In that, nothing unique was done by Bezalel that differs from how it is recorded in Pashas Truma and Tetzaveh. And Beis Ve'ikar, Bichdei Loidia Seder Va'asiyah HaMishkan Tchila V'achlav HaKelim Eino Nechutza Kol HaRicha, so it is Proti Advarim Va'asiyah Amidas V'chulu. And the main question, that if the Torah wants to repeat it just for the sake so that we know that he changed the order and he made the Mishkan first and then the Kelim, so that does not require the details of the Kelim and the measurements and all that. The Seirem is more than that. After all the repetition of all the details, when we come to the pasuk in our Pasha where it says that they brought the Mishkan to Moshe, so then Gimel Hakosim Mefaret Shuv is called Prot Advarim Shel HaMishkan V'Kelim V'Chulu. So here really there is an additional repetition. It says that even after they already made the Mishkan, and the Torah tells us by making the Mishkan all the details, then it says they brought the Mishkan to Moshe, and over there the Torah again tells us another small repetition of enumerating the Mishkan and the Kelim. Each one of the Kelim is repeated again. And and only after all that does the Torah conclude that everything in accordance how Hashem told it to Moshe, that is how the Bnei Israel accomplished and did the entire Avodah. When really this concluding pasuk is really all that would have been needed. So Rashi does not address it, and that is the main question that the Rebbe is asking here in the Sicha. How can Rashi ignore such an obvious question in the Pshuta Shel Mikra? Numerous Mefarshim deal with this question, and Rashi, not a word. And the answer is very simple and straightforward, as the Rebbe is going on to explain. As the Rebbe said in the beginning of the Sicha, that when we see such a situation, it's one of the two. Either Rashi doesn't find this to be difficult, or based on precedent and previous Rashis in Chumash, we already can understand the answer on our own. And in this case, it's not that this is not a question in Pshuta Shel Mikra, that the question doesn't begin. It is a question. However, Rashi doesn't need to address it because Rashi already did address it. How so? So first, we have to understand that another thing. HaMishkan v'kelim he'mo'inyonim hachi'ikrim v'chavimim etzel bnei Yisrael. The Mishkan and the kelim of the Mishkan is one of the most cherished and dear things that the Yidden have. Shal yodam hois hashras hashchinu v'bnei Yisrael v'chul. Through the Mishkan, the Shechina dwelled among the Bnei Yisrael. Uma'oid, and even more, Mishkan nikra kepirush Rashi pashaseinu Mishkan ha'edus. Why is the Mishkan called Mishkan ha'edus? The Mishkan that gives testimony. What testimony? Explains Rashi in our Pasha. Edus li Yisrael shevito lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma'aso egel. It is testimony for the Yidden that Hashem forgave them for the ego. The fact that Hashem makes his Shechina dwell among them in the Mishkan testifies that Hashem was mevater, forgave them for the ego. This understanding obviously raises the importance and how dear the Mishkan is, and what a general concept in Yiddishkeit and Bnei Yisrael, what a central role the Mishkan played by the Yidden. The Chet Egel is the arch sin. It is a major Aveira. It caused the greatest concealment of Hashem, that Rahman al-Islam, it even evoked an initial desire, so to speak, to wipe out Chas v'Shalom, the entire cloud. That even after Hashem already forgave, but the punishment still will continue. As Hashem said, whenever Hashem punishes the Yidden for something, he'll mix in some of the punishment for the ego over all generations to come. So we realize from that the severity of the Chet Ego, and that appreciation for the severity of the sin makes us appreciate even more that the Mishkan is a major central theme and very special and precious place in Bnei Yisrael. Shechavivus Yisrael Zuda Mishkan Ifnei Baruch Bnei Yisrael. He had tamleka shakotz meines kol prota Mishkan v'cheza aleim kol protein pamu pamayim v'chul. This importance and this cherished status that the Mishkan has by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and by Bnei Yisrael is the reason why the Torah repeats it again and again and again. And Rashi has no need to explain this reasoning over here. We already learned this from Rashi in Parshas Chayis Sora in Sefer Bereshis. Because over there it says, when the Torah described all the things that happened when Eliezer went in the shlichus of Abraham to find Rivka and bring Rivka to Yitzchak, so the Torah then repeats it, the entire story, everything that happened, with all the details, when the Torah describes how Eliezer told it to the mishpacha, the family of Rivka. Although over there also it could have just said Eliezer told them everything that occurred and everything that happened to him on the way, or all the above. The Torah doesn't do that. The Torah says Eliezer told them, and goes on to explain and to describe again in detail everything that happened. Rashi, so Rashi over there explains that the reason why the Torah finds it important to repeat the entire episode again is because the Chavivus, because it's such a cherished story and such a special, precious story. Shekain, what does Rashi say? Rashi quotes, Omar Rabbi Acha, Yofes Yichosin shel Avdei Ovis lifnei Amokim miterosin shel Bonim. Rabbi Acha taught that the Sicha, the talk of the Avdei Ovis, the servants of the Ovis, like Eliezer was the servant of the Ovis, is so beautiful and so special. Lifnei Hamokim, before Hashem, miterosin shel Bonim, even more than the Torah of the children. Because the story of Eliezer is double in the Torah, it's repeated. While many major concepts in Torah and mitzvahs is only alluded to in the Torah in a word or a few words, but not described and not written out in detail. From here we learn so we see from that something that is precious and special by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah will repeat it with all the details. Although nothing new and no new insight is derived through that repetition, still, because it's special and dear, the Torah will repeat it. So from that we understand the same thing is true in our case, because the Mishkan is so special and so precious that although the Chet HaEgel was so severe, nevertheless the Mishkan served as the conduit to bring about the Ashras Ashchina among Bnei Yisrael. So that is what is so special about the Mishkan, both in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's eyes as well as in the eyes of Bnei Yisrael, and therefore the Torah repeats it. It doesn't teach us anything new. Rashi says in the beginning of Parashat Vayakel, I already explained to you all the details in Mekem Tzavosim where they were first commanded, Truma, Tetzaveh, Sicha. So really Vayakel Pekudei is not giving us any new insight, not about the Mishkan and not about the Kelim and not about the Bigdei Kahuna, and nevertheless, because it's so special, the Torah will repeat it. And Rashi doesn't have to spell that out for us. We know that already. Rashi taught it to us in Parshas Chayei Sarah. Achadayin tzarich lahav pirush Rashi ze muchach lecheira lehepech shetam ze ein shaykh binyoneinu. One might ask that on the contrary, this Rashi in Parshas Chayei Sarah seemingly tells us that we cannot apply it over here. Why not? Because what does it say there? Rav Acha said that the talking of the Avdei Ovis is more precious than the Torah of the Bonim. So that's kipshutei, simply. The Torah that the Bonim have after Matan Torah, we don't find this type of chavivus expressed, which would result in a repetition in Torah. We only find that in Sichas Avdei Ovis. If you look at the simple meaning of the words over there in Rashi and Parshas Chayei Sarah. So how can you apply that about the repetition, about the making of the Mishkan, which is really part of the Torah of the Bonim already? The Rebbe says, no, that's not true. It is a good explanation. How so? The point that Rashi is making over there in Chayei Sarah, that the Sicha of the Avda Ovis is more precious than the Torah Shel Bonim is not meant to contrast the Avda Bonim being more special than the Bonim. The contrast is not between the servants of the Ovis versus the Bonim, the Bnei Yisrael after Matan Torah. Rather, the contrast is meant the contrast of Sicha versus Torah. So there it happened to be the Sicha of the Avda Ovis, and the other side is the Torah of the Bonim. But the point is not the Avda Ovis and the Bonim, the point is Sicha versus Torah, and therefore you can have, even after Matan Torah, a situation of Sicha versus Torah. Hachiluk b'neim kipshutu. What is the difference? Torah perusha herois tzivuyim v'dinim shetziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu malases ubeizei von lases. Torah means instructions, commandments, laws, what Hashem commands us to do and how to do it. Sicha perusha dibur shebegolu kipshutei ein tziva v'hera. Sicha means talking, telling a story, saying something which on the surface level is not a commandment, not an instruction. It is a storytelling, it is a description of a situation, me'ura, of an episode of something that happened, pe'ula, an action of some sort, and the like. As it was in the story by Eliezer, the Eved of Abraham. What did he tell Lavan, Besuel and Lavan, the whole family? He told them about Abraham, he told them about Yitzchak, he told them about what happened to him, how the way was shortened, how Hashem made him meet Rivka, and all the details, which is not an instruction, it's not a commandment, it is a story that is being told. How the Sicha of even the Avdei Ovis, how this Sicha, although it is from the Avdei Ovis, but even of the Avdei Ovis, which obviously the Avdei Ovis aren't as special as the Bonim, the Bnei Yisrael, nevertheless, although we're talking about the Avdei Ovis, but their Sicha can sometimes be better of the Torah, and even the Torah, not their Torah, but the Torah of the Bonim. So the same thing is true about our parshas. Our parshas of Vayakol Pekudei, which are already after the Truma and Tetzaveh parshas, because Truma and Tetzaveh that's instruction. That is where Hashem gives us the commandments and the instructions about building the Mishkan and the Kelim and all the details. So that's the place where the instruction is given. But these parshas, Vayakol and Pekudei, these parshas are not coming to instruct us how to do and what to do. And if it wouldn't have been written, we wouldn't have known. No, that's obviously not so, because we would have known. We would have known it already from Truma and Tetzaveh. Rather, these parshas come to tell us a story. They describe to us how Moshe Rabbeinu gave over all of these commandments to the Yidden, and how the Yidden fulfilled these commandments. So it's a description of what happened. It's not the instruction. In other words, this is an example of Sicha, not Torah. And considering the fact that this Sicha is not just a Sicha about anything, rather this is a Sicha about the Mishkan, which, as explained above, is so central and precious and dear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Bnei Yisrael. Chaviva hi kol kach. It is so precious. which therefore it deserves to be brought with all its details again and again, kfula b'Torah. Al pizem moving atam, she's kirash in Pash Chai Sodas Shmershal Balamayim Rab Acher Shezel Kim Duba Kama Pomim. In Pash Chai Soda, Rashi mentions who said the teaching that sometimes the Sicha of Avda Ovis is more precious. It was Rab Acher, and Rashi quotes Rab Acher by name. Shezel Kim Duba Kama Pomim, as already explained numerous times, that when Rashi mentions the name of the Tana or the Amoira, it is because by mentioning the name, it gives us an additional insight and understanding. Because by bringing the name, we can understand better the meaning of this teaching. It will further stress the point that the Rebbe explained here before, that the contrast is not the Avda Ovis are more precious than the Bonim, and therefore their stories being repeated, that the contrast is between Sicha and Torah, and that is the main point. That the point of the teaching is that the Sicha component is so special. And then that is also the reason that therefore sometimes the Sicha is more precious than the Torah. How will that be better understood? By quoting the name Rabacha. Is the following. The Gemara in Yuma quotes a Braise that the Barto Bom, we say in Kriyashma, with the Barto Bom, you should speak words of Torah. Says the Gemara, says the Braise, Bom v'loi b'tfila, that Divrei Torah take precedent over davening. Another, with the Barto Bom, you have permission to speak in them, in the words of Torah, but not other things. Then the Braise continues what Rabbi Acha said. Rabbi Acha said, make them, the Divrei Torah keva, they should be permanent, and don't make them aray, don't make them temporary, secondary. So there's a difference between the first two teachings and Rab Acha's teaching in this Braise. The first one says, Dibal Tobom means to negate tefillah. And the second teaching, Dibal Tobom, that you only have permission to speak words of Torah, it comes to negate speaking Dvarim B'Teilim and other words. Rab Acha is not talking about V'Dibal Tobom negating something else. Rab Acha is talking about in what manner should you treat Divrei Torah. V'Lecheira, Mizesh Rab Acha Eisek B'Dvara Rak B'Chiyu U'B'Shlila B'Negel Divrei Torah. The fact that Rab Acha, in his words, is only focused on the positive of what Torah should be like and what Torah shouldn't be like. It should be keva, it shouldn't be aray, but it's all talking about how Torah should be. And he doesn't mention negation of anything else. Unlike his Bar Plukte, the one who argues the first opinion in the Braise, that it comes to negate something, it seems that Rab Acha is not negating Dvarim Achedim. The question though is, what does that mean? Can we really believe that Rab Acha somehow is okay with spending time talking other things, rather, the explanation of Rab Acha is as follows. Rab Acha madgish, Rab Acha stresses that when it comes to Divrei Torah, we have an obligation to we are constantly obligated to speak words. Words should be permanent and not temporary. When it comes to other things, you can't completely negate them. And laws and the like. Rather, these are stories being told, words of inspiration, and therefore even such a Sicha might be beautiful. And sometimes these words of inspirations and these words of stories being told at times might even be more beautiful than the Torah. Nevertheless, says Rab Acha, that still, Torah you should make the permanent state and not arai. Even a 5-year-old can appreciate it is self-understood that a person has to constantly remember, and therefore he needs to constantly review and learn and talk about the instructions of the Divrei Torah. Is what needs to be done. Masha also lasts and what is forbidden to be done. But nevertheless, at times, there is also importance to the Sicha components of Torah, words of inspiration, stories being told. And sometimes these are even more precious than the Torah. But nevertheless, V'dibal Tabam, more permanently, is the words of Torah. That is what Rav Acha is stressing in that Raisa. In the two parshias, Pekudei, that the Torah repeats all the details of the Mishkan and the Kelim, there are two general points. Aleph, Nedivus Halev Shel Bnei Yisrael, the offering of the heart, the investment of the heart in the Nidvas HaMishkan. Shevius Kol Tzarech HaMishkan B'Zrizus HaChigdela U'Be'ofen Nedivus Halev. They even brought all the material very, very quickly and with an open hand, an open heart. That it was a need to make announcement in the camp of Klal Yisrael. We got everything, there's enough, don't bring any more. And there was extra. That's one, Nedivus Halev, one point. The other point, base, there was a Kiyum Tzivei Hashem al Dechach Melev, that there was the fulfillment of Hashem's command by the Chach Melev. Also is Melech Samishkan V'Kelev Kechol Asher Tziva Hashem, that they did everything as Hashem had commanded. U'Bezeh Gufek Asher Tziva Hashem is Moshe, as Hashem commanded Moshe. So there's two components. There's the Nedivus Halev, and there is sticking to what was commanded. And really we see how both had both of these in Yom. Yes, there was an Edivus Halev when they brought the material, but they also fulfilled a Tzibui of Hashem, which is like an Eved. I'm told to do it, and I'm doing it. Hashem commanded that the Truma should be taken from anyone whose heart will have that Nedivus slave, that's giving nature. Truma, take from among yourself this Truma. So it was Nedivus Halev, but it was also a Tzivui of Hashem. And also, when the Chachmei Lev made the Mishkan and the Kelim, although they just followed orders and made as they were told, but also it says, Kol Ish Asher Nesoi Libay, that the Chachmei Lev, that their heart brought them to work in this work of building the Mishkan. So there was also the heart component. Sicha ve'avdei avis. So we have here the Sicha component, and we have here the Evet component. Sicha kshura lelev. Sicha is connected to the heart. Share Sicha inin tefillah. K'mayim Razal. We know that ain't Sicha elo tefillah, the Gemara says, and Rashi says lo suach is lashon tefillah, to speak. You speak davening. So we see that Sicha is connected to the heart. Ezui aveda shebelev, zui tefillah. Tefillah is the aved of the heart. But tefillah harei aved shebelev. Veilu eved madgishes in kim hamitzvus. The point of eved underlines the fulfillment of a command. Like a slave, like a servant, fulfills his master's command. So these are the two inyanim. Nidvas hamishkan, nedivus halev de bnei Yisrael, which is the inyan hasicha. The kimat siva dasiyas hamishkan, the eved. And both of them have to be koilel, both things. They have to be inclusive of both. When a Yid makes a mitzvah, does a mitzvah, he fulfills a command, but he has to do it with nedivas halev. He has to invest his heart in it. And on the other hand, nedivas halev, when a Yid has a feeling for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, still it has to be felt that the reason why he has these feelings and this Nedivus Alev is because Hashem commanded him to invest his heart into this Avodas Hashem as well. So from this we also have the Hirah in all our Avodas Hashem, that on the one hand we fulfill Hashem's commandments, but we shouldn't just do it in a dry manner. We should bring our heart into it, and at the same time our Avodas Halev, Avas Hashem, and Yiras Hashem is not just because these are our personal feelings. We do it because Hashem commanded us to develop these feelings of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem.